I will read through the notices at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, we welcome the use of Welsh language at our meetings, but as I've received no request to speak Welsh today, this meeting will be conducted in English only. This meeting is being transmitted live via webcast and will be available to view wherever and whenever people wish to view it. This means there is no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. Please remember that you may be visible on camera when others around you are speaking, and when you are speaking, to use your microphone. I know we had problems with the audio links this morning. We've given out some individual headphones, I believe, but again, can we just remember to speak closely into the microphone so be sure that it picks it up. If the fire alarm sounds, follow the green signs down to the Civic car park. Can I ask that all mobile phones and other noisy devices be turned on to silent? And finally, if we have any motions put forward during the meeting, we'll need them to be in writing. Okay, we go on to agenda item 1. For this one is attendance. This register's going around. Agenda item 2 is apologies. Have we had any apologies for absence?
Yes, Madam Presiding Member, we've had apologies from Councillors Ron Burnett, Mike Jeremiah, Jason O'Connell and Chris Tew.
Thank you. Members, any other apologies that we know of? No. Okay, then we go on to agenda item 3, which is declarations of interest, and Dennis will advise her.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report refers to schools in general, so my advice is that there isn't a need for members to declare an interest at this stage. However, if during the course of the debate you enter into a discussion in relation to a particular school, you should then consider declaring an interest at that time, and that would be likely to be a personal interest. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay then, so agenda item 4 is the main item, school categorisation and performance. I'll hand over to Dermot.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Afternoon, members. Members, the purpose of the report I think is quite clear, so I'm going to move straight into section 3 around categorisation. And categorisation is one of those issues in Wales, I think, that's got lots of different myths and misunderstandings associated with it. So I'm just going to go through a part of the report just to again be clear what we mean by categorisation and what it shows us. So what is categorisation? Fundamentally, categorisation examines our school's capacity to self-improve. Categorisation provides a judgment, therefore, on the ability of schools to self-improve. And that ranges from A, in terms of step 2, and that's in the body of the report, which shows our schools which have got the greatest capacity to improve, through to schools who are categorised as D, in terms of step 2, where these schools need the highest levels of support. Learners' performance, clearly, in terms of the ultimate categorisation, is a key component that we look at when we agree what categorisation each school needs. And the judgment about capacity to improve are closely aligned. So overall, this system is intended to strengthen schools' capacity to bring about their own improvement. That's part of the National Mission Statement, part of the national agenda around school improvement, and to contribute to systems-wide change. We expect our best schools, therefore, not to contain their own practice, but to share that practice and support other schools, both who are in their own clusters and further afield. So some of our schools, for example, in Torfaen, support other schools in Torfaen and support schools across the region. So resultantly, this informs the tailored programme of support. So whatever your categorisation is, that then is mirrored or matched to a tailored programme of support, challenge and intervention provided by the EAS on our behalf, and also the support that the local authority puts in place too. Section 3.3 gives you where we've been in terms of primary categorisation over the last 3 years. I think it would be useful just to go through what that picture tells us about where we've been with our schools. So, excuse me, over the last 3 years, the proportion of schools categorised green has increased and is now 52% at primary. And overall, 92% of our schools require the lowest levels of support. So in terms of primary schools, their capacity to self-improve actually is really improved over the last number of years, and compares well in terms of the regional and national picture as well. We've only got 2 schools who need higher levels of support. Only one of those is red. One of the things I should point out and just remind members, but I know you know this already, is that categorisation isn't just about performance. Some of the things that impacts on schools' categorisation can be around absence of leadership, key leadership members. So we've got a head teacher at the moment in one of our schools who's had a very serious accident. He's away from school. That would impact in terms of the school's categorisation because we need to put more support in. So it's not just about performance, it's obviously about the level of support the school needs to perform well also. So that's where we are in general terms around primary. Secondary is clearly the area of concern for us and has been consistently over time, probably since the beginning of Torvine after local government reorganisation. So clearly the performance of secondary schools and the categorisation of secondary schools remains an area of significant concern, with the majority of our schools requiring significant and often the highest levels of support in the region. Each one of those schools has a tailored package of support, and we give details of those packages in the last extraordinary council meeting, I think in July, and we can obviously provide members with updated detail on that if requested, or we can put that in the members' library. I would reassure members that we meet with each school categorised red on a monthly basis to look at those actions, to look at what impact those actions are having in terms of moving forward, in terms of leadership, quality of teaching, and also review what progress they're making against often, in all three of those cases, of the three schools categorised red, the post-inspection action plan as well, in addition to the school development plan. So looking at the data around categorisation, I don't think it shows decline. I think what it shows, and we've discussed this before in this chamber and at overview and scrutiny, is more, I don't think it shows a decline. I think it's too many of our supports continue to need the same level of high support over time. So I'm not sure it's actually showing decline. I think all of our schools, secondary schools, are still requiring too high a level, but we've been in that position for some time. And that's going to raise some challenges clearly that will come to an end in terms of what are we doing, and are we doing the same things, so what differently do we need to do? Before we get to that, I'll just look at the outcomes at Key Stage 4 since 2016, which is in section 3.5. Obviously, we've been talking about the changes in education over the last number of years. You know, there have been a whole series of changes around GCSEs. I think there's been 27 changes to GCSEs over the last 4 or 5 years. So this does make direct comparisons year on year quite difficult, and to be honest, they're not really valid. But notwithstanding this, okay, not hiding behind that issue, it's very clear that the overall outcomes for our learners at Key Stage 4 and 5 remain disappointing and are not good enough for too many pupils. Looking back over time at the work we did previously with the Recovery Board following special measures, when we were in special measures, I think in January 2016, at that point Eston were reporting that our rate of improvement across secondary schools, particularly at Key Stage 4, but not limited to that, was faster than the rate of improvement than many other authorities across Wales. But since 2016, I think that's shown in the categorisation data available over the last 3 years, certainly, we've plateaued. Since that time, outcomes in the majority of our secondary schools has stalled. Since that time, the overall performance in the old level 2 threshold, which we don't use as a primary indicator anymore, but that was the 5 good GCSEs, including English or Welsh and maths, actually declined across Wales by 10.4%. Our decline in Torvine was 7.6%, so it's less. However, while some might think that's evidence of, I've heard this said, of Torvine having managed the wide range of changes in education perhaps a little bit better than other LAs, that's not a view that I share, and certainly not one that the service subscribes to. I think it's important to go back to the Step 2 outcomes, that potential, that ability, that capacity for improvement in the school's categorisation in section 3.4. Over that time period, the majority of our secondary schools' capacity to self-improve has remained too weak, and consequently outcomes have remained poor. I've stressed that simply because it points to where we need to go to in terms of getting improvement. So critically then, this takes us into section 3.6 and following. What are the key issues impacting improvement, and what are we going to do about them, and what are we going to do that's different? Because I recognise if we continue to do some of the same things, will we not simply repeat the same outcomes? So, looking at inspection reports and looking at the pre-inspection reports that we've prepared, so Eston's advice, the advice that we with EAS prepare about our schools before they're seen by Eston, there are a number of common characteristics that come out in terms of all of our schools causing concern. And these issues are the need to see improvements in leadership, both either and or at senior leadership or at middle leadership. They need to improve the quality of teaching, not surprisingly. Lots of inconsistency in too many of our schools. Particular weaknesses in the teaching of skills and the skills agenda across subjects, so looking at literacy skills beyond traditional English lessons and looking at how those skills, for example, might be in other subject areas across the humanities and beyond. And then planning, schools' ability to plan for improvement and self-evaluation. How reflective, how accurate are schools in their own assessment of how well they're doing, and then how are they able to intervene appropriately based on that self-evaluation. If your self-evaluation isn't accurate, how do you improve? And again, that points to an activity I think that we'll be looking at for ourselves too. So as I said, these are issues that we, working with the ES, have identified and are echoed in lesson inspections. A significant body of support is available to all schools on the development of leadership, professional learning and developing school-to-school work, although it has been for some time, so I'll come back to that. So working with partners across the region, other local authorities and the EAS, we've also recognised the need to develop an enhanced approach to supporting schools to develop their own school development plans. So every school is required to have its own school development plan, which looks at the key issues for their learners and want the school taking on board all the different characteristics the school may have in terms of its catchment, in terms of the issues that it's facing, how they will address those needs. Because ultimately, solutions for effective school improvement must be generated from within and driven by school leadership teams and governing bodies, albeit with the support from Council, from the EAS and from other agencies potentially as well. So the new school development process supports schools in how they can best address their own specific issues and to ensure how they have coordinated support to improve the effectiveness of schools, of their own school improvement work. One of the things I do need to say in terms of some of the feedback we had from the first round of this work is that we know we've got a lot to do. There was quite a bit of variability on the quality of secondary schools' SDPs, school development plans, that were presented to us this year. And so we're working with schools to really improve their ability to develop their own school development plans in a way that we know can actually bring about impact. And we're doing that, and we've mentioned this, I think, in the last extraordinary council meeting, through a range of workshops, different surgeries to problem solve and work with schools, and professional panels. Next round of those panels is coming up in a week's time. Members will be aware that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee have already had the chance to look at the draft EAS business plan this year, and this plan is going to focus on all of the things that you'd expect us to look at. Critical for me is the need to raise aspirations for our learners and for us as council and for all of our schools to make sure that we are absolutely expecting the best possible outcomes and that we're always striving for those despite some of the obstacles that get in our way sometimes, be that funding, be it the nature of buildings and so on. Whatever the barriers are, we need to be pushing for the best possible outcomes for our learners. We need to accelerate the improvement in pupil outcomes, particularly but not limited to Key Stage 4. For me, a big issue is about what we're doing across all of our secondary school, every year in secondary school, because we shouldn't just be looking at what's happening at the tail end of secondary school, of your statutory school age. We know we've got strength in primary provision, so we need to maintain that strength and develop that throughout Key Stage 3 and then see those gains come through in Key Stage 4. Critical is getting the consistency and the quality of teaching and leadership right in each of our secondary schools in particular. And obviously, all of that's wrapped up with, and some people might see this as part of a barrier, but there's opportunities here, in terms of the national reform agenda, in terms of where we are with the national mission statement, where we are with the new curriculum as well, because education, as we all know, is still going through quite a period of change. Now, if members have read the draft business plan or the report to Overview and Scrutiny, there will be a recognition that much of this work has been delivered already over the last few years, and yet the improvements that we all want to achieve have not yet been realised. So in terms of support for professional learning, in terms of support for leadership, there's a very extensive range of work available through the EAS for our schools, and a lot of that work's actually been independently evaluated, and we know it's of good quality. But nonetheless, we're in the position where too many of our secondary schools still are not performing at the level and in the way that we'd like them to, and that the issue of development of leadership is not as well advanced as we think it ought to be. So what are we going to do differently? So we want to reassure ourselves that we and all of our partners, and critical to this clearly our schools, our head teachers, senior leadership teams, governing bodies, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to achieve the improvement that we want to see. And to this end, we've been in discussion, quite extensive discussion now, with Welsh Government and colleagues in the EAS to develop a supported self-evaluation review for us and for all of the work that we do, which will evaluate our working practices and will explore how the current arrangements support and challenge the work of the EAS in our schools on our behalf. So the initial framing of the review is underway, and in fact the review in effect has started, and we're meeting with Welsh Government colleagues again later this week, and this work will continue over the course of this academic year. We don't want to rush this piece of work, because clearly it's too critical in terms of the outcomes that we want to achieve. We want to make sure that we get every bit of value out of the work that we're going to do. It goes without saying that we'll be working closely, as I said, with all of our secondary head teacher colleagues in developing and delivering this work. So it's important for members to note that this work will also focus on our own systems to support schools, as well as what we're doing with EAS and how we're supporting schools and what they're doing. So, for example, some of the questions we know we need to look at in the review will be around the capacity that we have internally around school improvement work within the education service. Because at the moment we've got one post that's focused on that. That's the sum total of our capacity, in addition to some time that I put into that, of course. And also we've been through a series of changes over the last number of years in terms of how we manage the challenges that we've all been facing around budget, for example. So we need to ask ourselves, are we doing what we can do internally, as well as are we getting value for money from colleagues in the school improvement service and in the EAS? And what lessons can we learn from neighbouring local authorities as well? A number of local authorities in the region have been through Essendon inspection recently and have been through some of this journey themselves, and we're in discussion with those authorities about what we can learn from what they've already done. We need to also look at, are there any improvements that we can achieve, as I say, looking at across the council services, because school improvement isn't just about the education service. We've obviously got needs work that's based in neighbourhoods. Is there any other improvements that we can look at there? Colleagues who do a fantastic job in HR and finance do a huge amount of work to support schools. All of you who are school governors, for example, will know the amount of pressure and challenge on schools in managing some of the challenges they face. So we've actually got a multi-agency team within the council looking at school improvement. It isn't just the work of the school or the education service. So we need to look at how other people are doing that work, how they're coordinating it, and again, if there's anything else we can be doing to support that work. And while some may... Oh, sorry, wrong page. And also, one of the other points we want to look at is, can council further enhance how we look at scrutinising the whole area of work around education and about educational outcomes, not so much about educational overview, young people's overview and scrutiny, but obviously I know that scrutiny itself have been looking at how you can reinvigorate the process around the subcommittee, but also looking at how we can make sure that members are fully informed about all of the work that education is doing going forward. The outcome of the review obviously is going to inform our own self-evaluation processes and planning going forward. So it's quite critical that while this may take some time, we've captured the messages and the key learning from this piece of work as we go forward and build that into our service planning on a month-by-month basis. I know that both Councillor Yole and I, Councillor Clark, have been keen to seek the engagement of both overview and scrutiny and members more widely in developing this work as it goes forward. And to this end, we'll be looking to establish an education advisory group to support the review over the year ahead. I think this is a point that perhaps Councillor Clark may wish to comment upon later on. So I'll conclude by saying, as a very quick run-through of the key issues that were raised in the members' questions, We absolutely recognise the need to achieve improvement across Key Stage 3 and 4 in the majority of our secondary schools, and we are determined to make any necessary changes to achieve this, and we look forward to working closely with members, head teachers and other partners from Welsh Government and the ES in looking at this piece of work over the next 6 months and beyond.
Thank you, Dermot. I'm going to bring in the exec member.
Can I thank Dermot for the report, and before I expand on the report, and some of the stuff will be slightly duplicated, and I apologise in advance for that, but it would be remiss not to thank Councillor Yole for his work in this role, one of the toughest roles on the Cabinet. He has dedicated several years to this portfolio and worked tirelessly and with a passion to make a difference. Those who wish to criticise on certain aspects fail to acknowledge improvements in others, and I pay tribute to his endeavours. It is important to note that the Education Service has much to celebrate. Major improvements have been made in the primary sector, initiatives to improve attendance and are working, and the school estate provides an environment for learners to be supported and developed. Dermot has rightly outlined the concerns in relation to the secondary school categorisation. The leader has asked me to take on this portfolio and work with him, the Cabinet and indeed all members to drill down and to see how we can make a real difference. You will appreciate that I am coming with a fresh pair of eyes and propose to hit the ground running tomorrow. With our education colleagues from other authorities, we're visiting Cardiff High School, which is seen as an exemplar school within South Wales, and we hope to learn from their good practice. Similarly, within Torfaen, we have the Green School at St Albans, and I will be hoping to see what ideas are transferable from that school to take to other secondary schools within our area. It is also my intention to meet all head teachers, but in particular the secondary heads, to know their perspective and their understanding of what is going on in their schools. We have had numerous initiatives and procedures in primary and secondary schools. The outcomes at secondary school level has not met expectations. It is important to unpick and evaluate what has worked well and what has not worked and learn from good practice. I want to have confidence that all of the arrangements we have put in place in schools for learners and the schools themselves are as good as they can be. This is why we have already been in touch, as Dermot mentioned, with colleagues in Welsh Government to support us in a supported self-evaluation. Myself, the leader, Chief Executive and the Chief Education Officer have met with the Welsh Government officials to secure their support in this work. I'm going to touch on a little bit of what Dermot said in more detail, but in this review what I'm looking for, as he's already partly said, is to look at what is going well, both here in Torfaen and elsewhere in the region and beyond, so that we can learn from these examples and see how we can apply them here in Torfaen. To review the work we do internally as a council to fulfil our statutory functions in monitoring pupil outcome and commissioning effective school improvement services from the EAS. Ensure we have clarity in terms of responsibilities for school leaders, the EAS, our officers and us as members, so we can all bear and be clear on how our accountability is being met. And look at the support for schools across council services to ensure we are giving every school the right level of support and challenge. And finally, to engage with our head teachers to hear their views and involve them in shaping our services as we go forward. This work, as Dermot has already said, is underway, and I'm hopeful that we can bring an interim report back before the summer break. In taking up this role, I am committed to make a difference and will work with the leader, the Cabinet, to ensure better outcomes, and all members have their role to play in this improvement process. The majority of us sit on school governing bodies, and I would urge those who aren't currently on governing bodies to become a governor. It might not be in your ward, but it would give you a perspective and allow you to be a critical friend within those schools and to see how schools can improve. As we approach the AGM, I would hope members would consider whether they could be on the Learning Scrutiny Committee and take part in the subcommittee, which I believe we've got a date for it to go forward, and it is my intention that that is reinvigorated and become the place for school improvement and to go forward. In scrutiny itself, it might be that we have to review whether we have a standalone education committee. That is something that I will take up and go forward with as we can. If the School Improvement Sub is not the place to do that, then we will have to review in due course, but that encourages wider consultation. And as Dermot alluded to, I'm keen to set up an education advisory group to help assist me in this journey, and that will be made up of the leader, myself, the chair of scrutiny, one member from each political group, and a member, not a member because you're not a group, and an individual independent councillor. Recognising that not all members can sit on this scrutiny committee and or the EAG, I'm keen to engage with members through member seminars, and I'm hopeful that the EAG and either the improvement subcommittee or a new learning education committee will fuel the member seminars that we bring to you so that all members can be engaged in the process. To conclude, all I'm prepared to say is I am prepared for the challenges ahead and will work to ensure that each school and each student has the opportunity to realise their true potential.
Okay, members, I'm going to open it to questions and comments. Hugh first.
Oh, that's better. Okay, thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. First off, I'd like to start by thanking the members who have called for this extraordinary council meeting to give us an opportunity to have a debate and discussion around what is a very important topic within the borough. I welcome the fact that there's a fresh pair of eyes looking at this, taking this forwards now. I do have some concerns, but before I move on to those, I shall say what I'm pleased to hear is being done in terms of the establishment of the Education Advisory Group and having a planning improvement officer in place. I think that's overdue and something that perhaps we should have considered before. I am concerned, since I've been here as an elected member, we've had schools, we've been in special measures, we've come out of special measures, we've now got these categorisations, particularly around secondary school, but there is one primary school in red, but the main focus of today and the concern today is around the secondary schooling. What alarmed me was, in spite of all the support that had been put in place over the years by this council to help heads and deputy heads put in performance improvement plan, the report itself today recognises that some of the plans that were put in place by the leadership teams within those schools were completely inadequate and needed to be sent back for revision, and that is a concern. The report has actually identified the key areas that have been highlighted impacting underperformance. These areas are not new. They've been known about for some time. We've had reporting on a school-by-school basis from the EAS identifying particular concerns within the school. I think what we need to do as an authority is to, as Dermot alluded to, is to have a radical change of thought process on how we've been dealing with this over the years. We need to move to a more outcomes-driven approach. Thank you.
In terms of impact, I think that's absolutely right. Now, you say outcomes, I say impact, but I think that's a critical component within the review. We've got lots of rich processes within school improvement generally, and anyone who's seen the EAS business plan or has been to the Joint Executive Group and looked at the work of the region, there are very clear processes, most of which actually have had independent evaluation by university professors, and the processes are found to be good. But everybody in this chamber might be happy with a good process, but will be a lot happier if it gives us the impact and the outcomes that we need. And at the moment, those aren't fully connected. So for me, one of the critical components in the review is that we look at quite but forensically about, well, what else should we be doing and how do we close that gap then between what looks like should be working and what hasn't been working quickly enough. And I think that's absolutely the focus. That, to be fair, all partners are keen to look at how we achieve, because everybody in our schools, and I should have said this in the body of the report, even all of our schools, even the schools facing the most challenge at the moment, we've got excellent practitioners. We've got people who turn up to work every day in difficult circumstances and are really doing their best. So we need to find every available tool and every support to them to make sure that their work also has impact too. So I'm agreeing with your point, really, Councillor.
Okay, I've got Colette next.
Can I welcome what you said, Richard, about reinvigorating the scrutiny and the Schools Monitoring Committee. I did raise these points with you and the leader some months ago, my concern about the really concentrated lack of scrutiny on schools. The Schools Monitoring Committee has not met for many months, and I did raise that with you. So I really welcome the new approach, and I look forward to working with you, and if I'm still on scrutiny, you have my full support.
Okay, David.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask why this report doesn't have any recommendations. This feels kind of more like a seminar than an extraordinary council meeting.
The reason for the report, you'll remember, those councillors who actually signed it, was around the increase in the number of red category schools as per the recent Welsh Government National Schools categorisation, and the matter to be discussed in the report were the reasons for the continued decline in Torfaen school standards. Excuse me. So I think we've answered that in the report. I don't think we were asked to provide any recommendations per se, so what we're doing is responding to areas of concern and obviously feeding back on the actions already planned and those that are taking place.
Kate, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I think when it comes to education, we've gone through a lot of the council since 2012. I'm not going to go too far back because I want to concentrate on one particular area. I appreciate that there's a change in the cabinet, and that is long overdue, and I must admit that. And I welcome that as well, if you like. In regarding the chief executive, the chief education officer, if you like, he was brought in, and we basically went up. Our standards went up, if you like, and that was great, if you like. And we had schools which came out of the red category. But what I'm leading to, and this was my concern at the time, is basically with all the austerity, etc., and there was a different, and there was more changes when it comes to the staffing, and you took on extra responsibility. And that was my concern at the time, knowing where we were in education, and this isn't a question in regarding competency. This is a question in regarding time, if you like. Since you took on the extra responsibility, call it, the schools have slipped back to the red category, and I'm questioning whether or not we would have been in this position now if you hadn't have accepted the extra responsibilities from when the education was going upwards. If like, I would have personally have kept you where you were, if you like, to have carried the upward trend. And so my question is, if you didn't accept the extra responsibilities yourself, would we be in this position now?
I'm going to bring in Alison first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kemp. I think it's a really good question, but I don't think it's really fair to ask Dermot to answer it himself. I don't think we can put this down to one individual, and can I just state for the record, I have huge respect for Dermot's ability and capability, and I think you're right that his leadership led to that improvement that you speak of. But this is quite a complex system, and of course the EAS are a very big part of that system. as are the education service and as are the schools. So I think it would probably be wrong to look at just one individual and say it's due to them or not. And that is really an important part of the review. I met with the Welsh Government official who's going to lead the review yesterday morning, and we had a very good discussion. By coincidence, she's one of the people that was on the improvement board when we were in special measures, so she knows us quite well. And one of the things that we talked about was the whole system. So we have to need to look at the whole system as to why, going back to Councillor Bevan's point, despite all the good processes we have in place, you know, and we can tick boxes for all those processes, when it actually comes to what's being delivered, the improvement in education for our young people has stalled, and that's the key question. And one of the things she will be looking at is the capacity within the education service team, whether we've got the right skills there, whether we've got the right number of posts, whether people are focused on the right things. So all of that will be part of that review. And whilst it will be a review that will take some time because it's an important, complex issue and we can't rush it, we'll have some early conclusions coming out from that. And I'll undertake, and I undertake to members to look at those as soon as they're available. And if we do need more capacity at certain points in the system, then obviously the leader and I will take that very seriously, as will the executive member.
I appreciate it's not down to one individual, and the council look at it collectively. However, at the end of the day, the buck has got to stop somewhere. It's as simple as that, if you like. And basically, I know we're talking about the EAS. Believe me, if the EAS were here today, I would be asking questions towards them as well. If, like, unfortunately they're not here, so it would be inappropriate for me to ask questions in regarding the duties and responsibilities of the EAS, if you like. However, as part of the review, I will be looking at Dermot's workload. It's as simple as that, additional work. But that's fine. In regarding, if like my other concern going forward as well, as it has been for many years, if like I used to be a governing body, a governor, and I came off it for various reasons. My concern, and I know it's with the schools, if you like, but I still don't think that we have the quality of governors, if you like, to actually challenge within the schools. And until we get that right, if you like, and I'll say it again because I've said it years and years, but nothing seems to be happening, if you like. There needs to be major changes in regarding the governing bodies, if you like. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say, we will be here next year and the year after that and the year after that. And I too welcome a new fresh pair of eyes. And what you said in regarding the comments to begin with, I welcome, and I really do looking forward to future seminars so that you can inform the rest of the council exactly what changes are going to be happening within the council to the concerned elected members.
I'll just come back on the governor support part in particular. I mean, again, I just say to all the governors watching this, thank you. Your contribution is really appreciated. We have a lot of really excellent governors across all of our schools, and they do a fantastic job. However, when a school goes into a category or goes into what we might call causing concern, whether they're in a red category or not, the demand on governors is quite significant. And it's a big challenge for people who are volunteers and who may not necessarily have an education background. So at the moment, and this comes back to the review, our government support used to be internal and now sits with the EAS. So some of the points that you have raised, we've raised with Welsh Government and with the EAS, and that will form part of the review, I think, because I think you've hit on something very critical. For schools, particularly facing challenge, the role of governors is really important. So anything that we can do to enhance that quality and level of support, I think I'm really keen to see how we can achieve that. The overall model for governance We've raised with Welsh Government too about have they got any thoughts about how they might want to see that develop, and that's something that we'll continue to work with Welsh Government on, because any support to governing bodies I would warmly welcome.
Sorry to add to that, obviously we did it at Scrutiny Committee when the EAS did come in, and I know as a point it was raised strongly around governor training and governor recruitment, etc. Because I think, yeah, we all agree. Yeah, if I bring David, see when he's come in on that point as well.
It's on. Yeah, my turn. First of all, working backwards, if you like, the current issue or question is surrounding governors. It might surprise you to know, Rob, that one of the more time-consuming functions of my role in the last couple of years is not getting necessarily the right governors, it's getting governors per se. There is an increasing concern because more and more people are very, very reluctant to take on the role of governor because they perceive it as a bridge too far in terms of the workload, and there are certain demands on governors now that weren't in existence 10 years ago, I understand that, but it's the devil's own job getting people to join the governing body, and there are people in this auditorium who are still not governors of any school in our remit, and that's a starting point. So whilst in a perfect world, you're absolutely right, what we need is better quality governors, and we can do that with the proper training, and there is a wodge of training made available through the EAS, but unfortunately this is linked to the earlier point that I was making of getting governors in the first instance, because not too many governors want to take on the role because they see it as more and more work. And there are some instances where governors join a governing body, and as soon as they realise that they are meant to go on committees and they need training, they back off. Now we have a problem. There is quite a lot, or there are quite a lot of vacancies, LA vacancies at that, right throughout secondary schools and primary schools. And until we can get people involved, and I repeat, there are people in this auditorium now who are not governors of any of the schools in our remit, unless we can entice more and more people in, then we are not going to get the right kind of people, because we're not going to get enough people in to identify the right kind of people in the first instance. Working my way back to the notion of the point that you were making, and I appreciate and I applaud it, you were making it for the right reasons and genuine reasons. You were concerned about the health of our chief officer. I worked with Dermot right throughout, before he took on extra responsibilities and while he was enduring those extra responsibilities. What he did was to work longer hours. Now that might have had an effect on his health, but it certainly didn't stop him shining lights in every dark recess of our education service. I was there on a daily basis with him. I can testify to that. So I don't think that it was necessarily a case of we started to slip when Dermot started to take on more responsibility.
Just to interrupt you a second, we've just got some legal advice around mentioning individual members of staff.
It's just being careful to not perhaps disclose some personal information about sort of individuals, really, and just be general.
I haven't mentioned any individual.
But, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, it's just...
You are an individual, Dermot. Can I finish by saying this, that I welcome, and some of you may not believe this, but I welcome a new perspective on the education service, because my concern is for the education service per se. I've struggled with it for the last 7 years, or 6 years rather, and it's incredibly difficult. No one gives you any credit for anything. It's an uphill struggle, and when you think that you've achieved one battle or victory, 2 or 3 come over the hill and smack you right in the face. It's a thankless task. Some people have referred to it as the poison chalice, but there are tremendous rewards to be got from working in that particular field. Richard, I wish you all the best. Anytime you want to talk about things, I'm more than happy to talk you through whatever. I think you'll do a good job in it. And already, before these changes, we started to establish the working patterns that we are now being putting in place. So I wouldn't want everybody to go away from this meeting thinking that these new measures are only being implemented since I've stepped aside, because that isn't the case.
Okay. Thanks for really selling it as well there, Dave. Right, I've got Liz next, then Glenn. Oh, sorry, Dave, you've still got your mic on.
Oh, sorry. It's called QBED, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome what I consider to be quite an honest acknowledgement of the seriousness of the situation. On page 5 of the report, it's sort of indicating that we are going backwards, and I do welcome that acknowledgement that because of the seriousness. The fresh pair of eyes I also welcome. I think that sometimes a different pair of eyes and new broom sweeps clean type of attitude sometimes is what's needed in a situation when we're not seeing massive changes to the better for something. And I welcome that, because I think we do need officers and leaders in this council that are prepared to make those tough decisions. So I welcome that tough decision. Dermot mentioned or did mention the EAS a little bit, and I'm quite interested to know why they're not here today. I'd sort of also like to know, how do we monitor them? I mean, we pay a significant amount of money to them every year. 500,000, I believe it was last year, slightly less it's going to be moving forward. So I'd like to see... I'd like to know how we are monitoring them, because we're paying for a service, and we are seeing evidence that there is a decline in secondary schools, and that worries me. But the other thing I'd like to point out, Councillor Thomas mentioned about there being no recommendation in the report. I think for absolute clarity we should have a recommendation, even if it is only, like we have done in very many other reports, to just note the report. So I'd like to move that amendment to the report, that we add the council note the report.
Before bring Dermot back in, are we all happy to accept that amendment? That, it'll be recommended. Okay.
And I'll take that on board for any subsequent reports as well. In terms of how do we monitor them, we could spend a couple of hours talking about all of the process, so I'll give you the overview as opposed to go into the minutiae of the detail. So obviously every time a member of staff from the EAS does a piece of work in schools, we receive a record of that. Critically, we have a couple of processes within the region, so not just what we do, but what we do with the other 4 local authorities. We've agreed the best way of actually looking at that quality assurance of what we get from the EAS. So we meet with them on a monthly basis and go through all of the schools causing concern, whatever that might be. Now, that may not be a concern that's picked up in categorisation, but it could be something where, again, there's been a recent change of staff, or there's some other issue impacting the school's well-being. And we look at all of the work, not only just from what the EAS have done, but what we've done in terms of Sharon Davis's role, the head of learning, what we've done across ALN, what we've done with finance colleagues and so on, and look at how that's impacting on what's happening in schools. So we never just look at the EAS, we look at how everybody's working together across the system. And then we also meet on a regional basis where we share some of that same work and compare, well, how are things being done in Monmouthshire, how are things being done in Blaenau Gwent, and we do that with all the other directors of education and the EAS too. Now, as part of the review, the key, and comes back to several councillors have made already, well, so what? So you've got these processes and you're doing that. Are we seeing the traction that we need to see consistently within and across all of our schools? And I think that's got to be one of the key focal points within the review. One of the phrases that haunts us, I think, from our recovery board days was, well, so what? So, I remember an infamous moment in the recovery board where we went along and said, here's all the processes we've now put in place so we can have confidence that we're actually doing things that we should do, and we've ticked them all green because we've put them in place. And they quite correctly and roundly said, yes, so what? Until we see the impact of what those processes look like for learners on the ground, it doesn't mean anything. So I think for us, that's part of what we need to look at in the review, both for what we're doing internally, what we're doing with partners, and what we're doing with the EAS. So those QA systems, those quality assurance systems, may well change in response to that.
I really welcome the review because I think, that at the moment the trajectory is going in the wrong direction for secondary schools, and more important than anything else, we need to make changes, and the review will help, hopefully will help that trajectory go in a different direction. Thank you.
Okay, Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I will add something to what Dermot said about the EAS. One of the issues is that they have a 2% year-on-year reduction in the amount of money we give them. That's resulted in them losing a seriously large amount of staff. However, they do independently check themselves and have recently had a report on value for money for the organisation, which was pretty good. I sit on ARAC, I sit on learning, what used to be learning communities, now children and young people. I sit on the schools monitoring sub. I don't think there's anything much in this report that I was not aware of. However, I would say that what we need to be aware of, we seem to be focusing on secondary schools here. What we need to be aware of is that there are only 6 of them. So anyone that falls into red is a 17.5% drop in what is seen as our results, if you like. And sometimes that is well beyond any influence of the EAS, of the LA, all of the school itself, where you have a head teacher who's ill, you have a deputy standing up for that head teacher as an acting head. That person then leaves the school, the head teacher comes back, the head teacher is further ill, and then you end up with a school that slips through nobody's fault really into red category. So, we need to acknowledge that not everything is somebody's fault. Sometimes it's just circumstances, building on circumstances that leave us in a position whereby a school slips into red.
Okay, I got Hugh and then Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. People that know me will know I'm outspoken and critical when needs be, but I also like to try and prefer a solution wherever I can add something to the debate. I'd like to come back in on the point about the governors and hopefully make some constructive suggestions around that, please, if you permit me to. From 2 things. The first point around what could be taken in terms of, I know it's difficult to recruit and retain governors, but with regards to the training of those governors that we do have, could we provide specific training for those governors that are in those schools identified in the red category, specifically addressing the reasons why that school is in the red category and training around that, other than the purely mandatory training? That's point number 1. And the second point is in terms of how members of the governing body can get a true handle on the actual performance of that particular school. Having been a governor of Pontier and my experiences of receiving reports there, I, even as a councillor, an elected councillor, was blindsided by the jargon that was used in the report that was presented to the governing body of that school, and it was nigh on incomprehensible and extremely difficult to understand unless you'd come from that particular educational background, which the majority of members of the Board of Governors hadn't. So that's the second point, really, in terms of what more can be done in terms of the reporting that's made to the governing body and really a sort of campaign for plain English. Thank you.
If I come back to that very quickly, the training for governors in red is almost the same answer for both points you've raised, and then how can we make it clearer? The challenge advisor for schools in red will go along to the head teacher's presentation on where the school is at and offer a categorisation report as well. So notwithstanding that education is awash with jargon, some of which is difficult to make as simple as perhaps I'd like it to be, I think that training already exists, so we always make sure that if schools in red, we try to look at what the bespoke needs of the governing body is as well. If we can improve that further, again, that's something that we can pick up in the review and individual discussion. And I will take back the message about how do we get to a language. One of the key components of schools going into difficulty is the whole governing body not being fully aware of the state of play in the school. So it may be that one or two governors might be aware, but not all governors are. So I think there really is an issue there about governance arrangements within governing bodies and how can we make sure that we get those clear messages into governance. So I think that is something we can look at.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, again. It would be remiss me not to bring up what Councillor Yule very challenging in regarding education over the years, but I've also given praise when it's been necessary to do so. And I'd just like to say at this particular stage that and acknowledge, because I have brought it up in full council as well, as in the primary schools and the fact that there's so many in the green category, if you like, and so all credit due, that needs to be noted. In regarding my second question, going back to collective responsibility, we were talking about the buck has got to stop somewhere, if you like. Can I ask the Chief Executive, Alison, if you like, where does the buck stop, if you like, first of all?
Ultimately, Councillor Kemp, the buck stops with me for everything that happens in the council and with the leader. That's the answer. With
the follow-up question then, in regarding the buck stops with you, how will you be monitoring the future educational performance going forward, knowing that the buck stops with you?
That's another excellent question. I should say that the review, was initiated. The first person to say we need a review on this was the leader. He called me in and said, Alison, I'm really concerned about secondary performance. I've just seen the categorisation. And my instant response was, I'm very concerned as well. We then had discussions with Councillor Yole and with Dermot, and I think all of us agreed that what we needed was an external perspective, because we've got this system and everybody seems to be saying the system works really well, but the performance is stuck or going backwards. So the review was commissioned by the leader and myself with Councillor Yole and Dermot. I will be personally taking an overview of that review. If I think that we need to bring in other people who've got a fresh pair of eyes, apart from the Welsh Government person that's leading it, then I will do so. And I've already been talking to Dermot about some possible external expertise, not a consultant, just somebody who could come in, maybe from England, maybe from a different part of the education system, and just say, have you thought about this? And sometimes you just need someone to ask the obvious question, and when you're in the middle of it, you can't see what the obvious question is. So I met, as I said to you, I met with the reviewer from Welsh Government yesterday, and she and I have agreed that we will meet fortnightly, myself and her, for the foreseeable future. She will keep me up to date with whatever recommendations she feels are appropriate, and if there are any that need urgently to be implemented, then I will be implementing them straight away.
Thank you for that. how will you be keeping the elected members informed in regarding the monitoring, please?
Okay, well, obviously this is going to be a movable feast, and it's not practical to be, bringing reports, to members all the time, because we'll be implementing things as they come along, depending on whether they need urgent attention. But certainly we've agreed to have member seminars. I think that's probably the best thing to do, to have regular seminars. I'm sure the new executive member, if he feels there's something that members needed to be updated with, will be happy to send out an email from time to time, just keeping people informed. I think that's the way to go. I don't think we need formal council reports unless there's something significant that we need to update you on.
Okay, next we've got Dave Thomas, then Dave Daniels.
Thank you for that, Madam Presiding Member. My question is kind of similar to what the Chief Executive just said. There's been a lot of talk about consultation being undertaken with the EAS, head teachers, senior leadership teams, council officers, etc. But has anyone asked the parents to identify the issues that they believe are affecting school performance? I mean, there are many parents out there who have some vital skill sets in life, and perhaps they could assist us with some of the things that they've seen and noticed that go on within our schools.
I think that's a good idea. I think the way that happens at the moment is that all the schools are required to actually survey their parents, and that comes through in terms of their own school development plans and their post-inspection action plans if they have those, and then we harvest that information from that process. One of the things we might want to do is to look at how can we also open up, for me, children and young people's views, particularly about their perspectives on what's happening in school. And again, all schools are required to have pupil voice. We've recently got, we're the first local authority service in Wales to have the kite mark for children's participation standards. So one of the things I'm keen to do is to look, working with schools councils, and the Youth, Children, Young People's Parliament that we're bringing forward, to look at how we can capture that. It's always a difficult one, and those of you who have been school governors or have been connected with schools in other forms over the last few years will know getting a representative view is always tricky, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it. And again, that might be one of the things that through the Education Advisory Group we explore in a bit more detail. And obviously you as ward members are in a unique position to also feed back to us. I know many of you do, and we've had discussions about individual cases, but that's another mechanism. So there may be a number of ways we can actually achieve that and feed that into the process. We're really keen to have an inclusive process that captures everybody's concerns to see how we can collectively find solutions.
Part of it, I mentioned head teachers. I'd like to continue the role Dave currently does of doing school visits, and that's when you actually get to speak to the children as well. And as much as I've banged on and others have banged on about elected members being school governors, there are specifically parent, I wouldn't criticise it, there are parent governors, and I think in part of my new role of going out to meet is actually to meet with those parent governors as well, because they're the ones who put their head above the parapet and said, well, I'm interested in the school, so they're going to have that idea. So I can, as part of those visits and what have you, whether I call a special meeting of parent governors or what have you, I would be interested in engaging with those over and above what Dermot's already said.
So I think to progress this on a little bit, I think we need to talk about the drivers of where we are, because I think we've talked a lot about responsibility, and I think you have to do that. It's inevitable that you have to do that. But I think quite quickly after that conversation needs to come a more deeper conversation about how we are, where we are. And I think looking through some of the graphs in here, I think looking at the table on 3.5, you can see that it's not endemic to Torfaen. It's a Wales-wide issue. This is a systemic issue. So it's not just us. I mean, that's not absolving ourselves, but that is pointing out that this is a trend, a Wales-wide trend. I think another thing I noticed, and I don't think it can be separated from this conversation, is the correlation, the positive correlation between free school meals and educational attainment. I think there's a strong link there, and I think we need to be looking at more pervasive work in righting some of those wrongs. In that graph in Appendix 2, I can't help notice that there's one school in particular from Caerphilly that bucks that trend considerably because it's in the top right-hand corner, and it is outperforming some of the best sort of Monmouthshire schools who have also the lowest free school meal percentages. This school has roughly about 26% free school meals, and yet it is outperforming those schools. So those are the sort of schools I think we need to be talking to, and this is the sort of detail I think we need to get stuck into now.
Okay, next up I've got Rose and then Janet.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My concern is that we haven't been told officially, but on the grapevine we heard that there's a lot of staff, both in the Education Department and in the EAS. And my question is, do we have sufficient capacity and resources to cover the enough support required for all our schools? And the other one is, do we do exit interviews with our staff that's leaving our departments?
I'll start with the EAS first. I think the reassurance that we asked, and it comes back to the point that Councillor Karen raised about the 2% reduction year on year, I think for the last 3 years with a further 1% looking at the year ahead. The model for the EAS has changed dramatically since it was first conceived. So the overall contribution from Torvine is drastically lower than when we first saw the formation of the regional consortia for school improvement. The changes over the last couple of years that the leadership within the EAS have been at pains to say that they've been looking at a different way of providing challenge advisory support by working with leading practitioners in schools to actually provide some of that support, for example. And some of our head teachers support schools, as I mentioned earlier, in other local authorities as challenge advisors. So I think the EAS would say that they've got the right level of support. I don't think anybody in their position or in my position is going to say we couldn't do with more, because do more, we'll always do more. But I think they've given us the reassurance as a company that they've got sufficient. Bearing in mind that the contributions to the EAS from the local authorities are a small fraction of the total resource that it has available, because there's over £50 million, I think, goes through the EAS in terms of grant allocation, for example, in addition to the core contribution. But that's a critical component. It is something I think as council and collectively across the region we need to be mindful of. What we put in could have a direct impact. But at the same point, there's an analogy here with some schools where we've got some schools who've got a funding formula. Some schools are performing really well in challenging circumstances because of the way they're actively managing their resource and because of the leadership that they bring to bear, whereas other schools in very similar circumstances aren't faring so well. So resource is important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. As always, it's about what you choose and how you choose to do with that resource. In terms of staff within the local authority, there haven't been that many changes. It feels like there's been a lot. We've seen Darren, sorry, I shouldn't mention names, I've just been told that, the head of finance post go, and that colleague has been working with us for a very long time. Finance doesn't sit within education anymore, it sits within central support services, and I think there's been another member of that team who's looking to move on. It's an issue for us as council. We've had, in those two instances, I can think of around finance, a colleague who worked with us, I think 30 years, or getting on for 30 years, and another colleague who's worked since their first post, since coming out of school. So we've actually got some really skilled people, but who quite rightly are looking for opportunities and looking maybe for some change. So retention for me is something that I'm really anxious about, because we've got so few staff. If we lose, my go-to example for this is admissions, because our admissions team is one person, overseen by another colleague, but it's really one person, and if that colleague were to move on, that would be a big issue for us. The head of learning is now taking a post with the local government, Welsh Local Government Association, so we've filled that post, and that colleague will be joining us straight after Easter. So there has been some change, and that's been unsettling. But I think coming back to the review and the focus of what we're trying to achieve, it is about clarity about the function and about the capacity, because I think we need to just take stock. There's been lots of change both within the educational landscape on a national basis with a national mission and lots of other changes around accountability. There's been changes in funding, and there have been changes in requirements on us in terms of what we deliver. So now is a good time to take stock, and that's part of, I think, that issue that you're raising, Councillor Siwan, is a really important one that we take cognizance of in the review as well. And sorry, the exit interviews, yes, we do. Yeah.
Chair, just a point. I noticed you note that you record free school meals, etc. But you haven't got a comparison of free school meals and ALN within our schools, and I wonder whether or not you actually take account of whether or not the amount or the percentage of free school meals and the percentage of ALN within that school as well.
So the short answer is yes, and we do have that data, and we do monitor vulnerable groups of young people. So we might look at young carers as well. We look at social care on that, and we look at obviously Gypsy Roma Traveller, our biggest ethnic minority population. We look at those and a range of other vulnerable groups. So we do look at that. We do ask schools whose responsibility it is, of course, to monitor that because they're intervening for those youngsters, and we do provide challenge on it. I think the issue around free school meals, and for me, free school meals is a very important component, and I argue that the last overview and scrutiny we need to continue to look at it, but we should be looking at any characteristic that makes a young person vulnerable in terms of educational outcome. We're doing lots and lots of work, and it is slightly distributed. And I think one of the pieces of work I know that we need to look at coming out of this review is how do we bring all of that together and feed back to members on what are we doing to make sure that any young person, whatever the issue that they're facing in their life that makes them more vulnerable is, how do we make sure that we've got the right umbrella of support available for them? Because any vulnerability going up, if it impacts on your outcomes, then clearly we should be interested, not just the easier ones to measure, because free school meals is a proxy for need, but actually there's other indicators, and we should do some of the hard yards to make sure we're making sure we capture all of those young people as well.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's more of an observation, really. And thank you, Richard. It's great to see that a review has taken place and that we're admitting to the failings that we've done for our children. I'm concerned mainly with our primary schools, the formative years of our children's education. And it would be an ideal world, it'd be lovely to see all our schools in the green zone. And whilst we're trying to achieve higher qualities in education and improve the quality of teaching, it worries me that this may not also be achievable, because while schools are setting their budget, they come across very difficult decisions to make, which could result in experienced staff being made redundant, etc. And also staff, because of illness or long-term illness, under the pressure they're under, leaving the system. I hope that we'll be able to offer some support to these type of schools and the staff as well, please.
Is that one for me? Fabulous. We obviously do try to support all of our schools. So if you look at, you mentioned primary, and I absolutely take that point. Early years and pre-primary is very close to my heart. We're doing really some fantastic work around childcare. We've got quite a high take-up of the childcare offer in Torvine. We're looking to absolutely maintain the work we're doing around early intervention through Flying Start, for example, despite some of the budget pressures we're facing there. And I absolutely agree with you. If we get it right in primary and pre-primary, that sets us up. Clearly, we need to accelerate what we're doing at secondary. In terms of the budget position, there's a healthier budget surplus in primary schools at the moment, and the majority of our primary schools are managing their budgets well. However, with that said, some schools are in some difficulty, and we are working with them, and they do face some tough decisions. There is no getting away from that. Mostly that's because of decisions the school's already taken about how it wants to spend its money and its resources. And one of the things that we have to hold up a mirror to schools as council is what was right 5 years ago. In effect, it's the same point of us having the review. What was right and worked 5 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in the context you're in now. So we have to, with colleagues from finance and from HR, push back to schools a little bit and say, is that what you currently need? Is that reflecting your needs? But there is a general point. As members will be aware, the change management budget in education is centrally managed, and it's nearly, it's about £1 million a year that we're seeing in turnover in school staff. Again, we're facing challenges in terms of retention, particularly not so much primary, but around Welsh Medium and faith schools in particular. So recruitment to Welsh Medium, not only in this borough, but across Wales it's difficult. But we're facing some big challenges. We are looking to work with our schools to see what we can do. But again, that is something that we'll need to look at and continue to look at as we go on.
Thank you very much.
Stuart?
Thank you for what you're saying just now, because two things I wanted to focus on. One was the debate just now about governors. Now, I'm not convinced there's lots of that governors are not suited. I was first a governor in Cardiff, and Jack Brooks, who was the leader of the council, Anthony Smiley, appointed a whole host of us as the area governor. He said, you do it. And we learned how to be governors. That was the approach they did then. Now we do all this training, etc. Well, I think governors is one of the things you grow your own. It's volunteering by any means. A lot of people learn on the job, and it's a really good approach. It's the same sort of thing that 12 Line Voluntary Alliance does. You're volunteers, you learn the job, and you're in there. And it's a really good. You find people being governors go on to be councillors, go on to be running voluntary organisations. We miss that trick because there's a lot of community capacity, for want of a better expression, in governors, and we don't treat governors like other volunteers. It's something special for the education department. I said you can be doing all sorts of other things. I think that's something that education actually has to realise, that there's volunteers. And you maybe ought to have a conversation with TVA about this one, because it's another form of volunteer. They can be going on to be governors, run the community. And there's a lot of young people who go into being parents, Jess is not in this, that can be pulled in. If you look at certain governors that I know, which Jess knows, there's a lot of very young people that could go on to. So there's community capacity in governorship that we need to look at it in a different way. And I sound like an old community worker, which is what I am. And that really is something we need to look positive at and get people in. And councillors are very busy and they can be a menace sometimes on the governors. I say that, we need them there, and because you're connected and you need to be there. That's why councillors, and every time I've sat the last 25 years on community council saying, who wants to be a governor? And sometimes a lot of people don't there. So, bring people in, and that's important. You have LEA governors. I've also been a parent governor. And that's important, you have parent governors, because they've got a different perspective. Now, the other thing I was going to say was what Dave brought up about, and it was this morning when we were talking about that new form of equality. And if you've got the disconnect with our community and our schools, we over the years talked about, is that school part of our community? It's the biggest building in most of our communities, and that connect between school and community, for various good reasons, we had to consolidate. So the connect between school and building is important. We can hear people in Blind Avenue, people in Cumbrand say exactly the same. Big resource, stays open, does things. And that's that connect. And if that school's in special measures, people hurt. Now, it's obvious that secondary schools ain't the same, because their areas think, so there's not a connect. And some of these figures actually reflect that, I think. Now, the connect between the communities, so for me as I'm community work, again, it's the same thing. I think you have a headache with that, because the connections and not connections, and special relationships is the problem you've got there. It's easy for easier for the couple of primaries that I'm on to get a good result, because they know where it is. It's the hub for it. So is that part of the problem? Because I'm looking at that and thinking to myself...
Before I bring Dermot in, because I was going to say it after you, and you've kind of started on it, about... recruitment of governors. But in particular, I was thinking about school leavers and work experience, that we do miss a trick there, that, it looks very good on a CV if somebody has been able to be on a school governing body and get good training. But, so...
I also add, with where we are at, we've got local community groups actually focused on there. You've got an automatic in there, you've got lots of wins in there. And I just said that connect for a primary is a lot easier than it is for a district secondary school, and I just wondered about this, Dermot,
In terms of the important part about governors is, of course, the local authority is only responsible for appointing local authority governors. So we can't take responsibility away from schools. That's the fundamental part of the legislation. The governing body drives performance and standards in school with the leadership team. So our role is to try to support. Now that fits within, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of maybe the scope of some of what we do with the EAS and some of the suggestions that are coming through, in terms of school leavers and in terms of other people who work in council. I mean, I know the call's going out to members here. One of the things I'd be keen to do is to also look at some of the high-quality staff sitting around the periphery of the room today and beyond, about bringing them into into governing bodies too. But our role is to really support governing bodies themselves and schools in terms of how we do that. The point you make about community-focused schools, I think, is really apt. I think that's really important. Council's invested a huge amount of money in building new schools and refurbing some of our schools, and we'll be spending more, I hope, over Band C and D of 21st century schools. And part of what we've done with all of those designs is to look at how we can ensure community engagement in using those resources. It's not a phrase I like to use, but sweating the resource, sweating the funding we've put in to make sure that it's a benefit to the whole community. Maybe people who don't have children in school want to use the sports facilities, other facilities available. But we also try to move back to a position where schools take a much more central role within schools. We're doing some of that work also. Clearly now that youth and play and sports development fit within education, do also see how we can make those connections. So I absolutely agree with you. I think the more the community is involved in school life, the more people will take ownership, and actually that will help in a whole host of ways in terms of actually impacting on school improvement. One of the biggest determinants of pupil outcome, for example, is how much engagement they have with their parents, and if their parents are listening to them read and taking an interest in their homework. That actually, in terms of the research, has a phenomenal outcome or impact on pupil outcome. And I think, similarly, the more engagement we have from the community in schools is only a good thing and will lead to improved outcomes overall.
This is a bit of a side share. You know, I went on in the press about 2 months ago about where I was going to put 70,000 trees. Some of the grounds at schools is a very good place because there's a lot of empty grounds around. So that schools are an essential part of local communities, and we recognise that it's really, really important. And this whole debate around community-focused schools is brilliant.
Dave?
Right, again, just to move us on a bit, in all honesty, I think that the seminars that Richard has offered, I think those are going to be the places that we drill down and get more information, because I think in order to diagnose a problem, you really need to look into it, and I don't know that we're there yet. Listening to the contributions from, including myself, I don't know specifically where we're going wrong. I think these series of seminars will draw that out, and I think that's where we're going to see the biggest contributions and the biggest movement. And, you know, I'm just trying to move us along a bit because that's my feeling. I don't know about other people, but, yeah.
Happy to know that I've had no more indications, so I'm bringing the leader in, and then we will move to the Recs. So.
First, if I can start with some words of reassurance and commitment, really, because our school's a priority, both for you and for myself as leader. And I say that as well as a councillor, as a governor and a parent too. So I think it's vital that we continue to strive for improved outcomes in each and every one of our schools. And whilst we're seeing continued improvement in primary schools, as has been said today, progress in some secondary schools is not satisfactory. So that's why I'm prepared to take the difficult decisions that are necessary and expect others to as well. I'd like to thank Richard for not running out of the room or hitting me when I suggested the change in portfolio. You didn't get a receipt, so there's no refunds. So good luck to you there. But I've asked Richard as deputy to step in as exec member as a sign of the importance that I attach to this issue. As a fresh set of eyes has been said today, to look closely at things and work very much alongside me on this issue. I welcome what he said today. I think it's a very clear, pragmatic action plan to try and take this forward. Together, I think we must roll up our sleeves and leave no stone unturned when seeing how we can support and challenge our secondary schools and achieve the improvements we all want. And I note the points that have been made today about the personal involvement of the Chief Executive and myself, and I don't shrink from that at all. And what I would say is please remember that means less of our focus on other things. There's only two of us, and more focus on some things. There's always a trade-off from focus on other things, but we're prepared to put in that time and that effort, as this is certainly a key priority for us as leads in this organisation. In saying that, I want to pay tribute to the dedication and perseverance of David as the outgoing executive member. He's certainly always put the welfare of education above short-term popularity. It's always easier to criticise than it is to effect positive change, especially in something as complex as education. But in doing that job, he's never lacked honesty, dedication or commitment to the role. I think we need to remember that he came into the role at a very difficult time when the need for continuity was identified to us at the time. and he's provided that. As leader, I always think there's a pressure to change things sometimes, but you've got to balance the advantage of fresh eyes with the advantage of having some experience and knowledge around the table. I don't think this should be a case of musical chairs every 6 months, for example, but I think when changes are made, it's very much with an eye to that new perspective and not as a criticism of anything that's gone before. So I'd like to thank David for his honesty and his dedication to the role that he's shown. Of course, I think we need to remember that education is all our responsibility, not just one person's. I'd again like to thank members who demonstrate their commitment to children's education through the policy decisions that you've made this morning, for example, prioritising revenue investment in schools, the decisions you've made consistently across the last 10 years about prioritising capital investment in our schools, through your engagement in council, cabinet and in scrutiny committees, and through your direct engagement with schools, for example on the governing bodies of many of our schools. Members and others, as has been said today, are more than welcome to ask Richard about joining governing bodies and to play a part in that respect. Others as well, I think, as has been said today, are welcome. And we need capable governors who are capable of fulfilling that scrutiny and that challenge role to school. I think it's a vitally important role, but we do have to remember that those people are volunteers. There are people who I've defended to the hilt criticism because they're doing the job as volunteers. They shouldn't be castigated when things go wrong because they're giving that commitment of their own time and of their own volition, and I think that's an important thing to say. One of my terms as governor of a primary school is coming to an end this month, I believe. Do I need to look at taking in the challenge up myself and becoming a secondary governor? If that's what would help, then I'm here to help, because I think it's important to lead from the front in that respect. I welcome the review that Richard's announced today, and I look forward to investigating how we can work with EAS and our schools to add pace to school improvement wherever it's needed. I will expect regular updates, both to Cabinet and Council, including an interim report before the summer break. The advisory group, alongside the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Cabinet discussions, can give members a variety of ways to contribute to this journey and to be better informed of progress and the challenges that face us. Now, meetings like this can sometimes get adversarial, and in that respect I really welcome the tone of today's meeting. I think a number of very valid points have been made across the chamber. Hugh Bevan's points about being outcome driven, being impact driven, whichever word you want to use, I think that's key. It can't just be a process of looking just at process. I think his point about plain English and governors is very important. I've been a governor before years ago, and I've had acronyms thrown at me like they're going out of fashion. That doesn't help you to challenge as a governor. That just pulls the wool over your eyes, and I think that's something we need to keep a keen eye on. I think Colette's point about the importance of scrutiny is something we should take very much to heart. Councillor Thomas's point about parental involvement and pupil involvement as well is important too. How do we improve that connect? Is that perhaps one of the reasons why our primaries are performing better than our secondaries? Is that connect between community and parents and school and council stronger at a primary level when the kids are nice and aren't teenagers?
I can agree with you.
Sorry, my eldest son turns 13 this month, so although my youngest is more of a teenager than him already. So, but is that something we need to look at, for example? I think we do need to drill down. Councillor Kemp's point about capacity, I think it is an important one that we need to look at, as Dermot has said he will, just so that we've got the right people doing the right jobs and we're not overloading people as well, which I think is important. Councillor Haynes' point about the report and how we monitor value for money and work with the AS. There shouldn't be a case of, hot potato blame game. This is a case of how we best work together and all fulfil our role. Of course, it's right to point out the majority of investment that we make in education goes direct into schools, and that shouldn't be forgotten. But how we work, how the EAS works together with those schools, I think is very important. Glencairn's point about statistical significance is always one that we need to keep an eye on, I think, especially dealing with a small number of organisations. I remember being in a governing body once and I asked about why there was a 50% drop in achievement amongst free school meal children in a year group, and I was told that represented one child. and I think we do have to keep in mind these sort of points of context when dealing with statistics. I think statistics can be used to support points and to investigate points. They can also be used to confuse the heck out of people. I think if you look at the CAP 9-point score, for example, that's a lot more encouraging than some of the other indicators are. I think what we need to do is, yes, use those statistics, but look beneath them to the fundamentals of leadership, teaching and learning in the schools, and then I think the statistics will follow in the right direction. I think the point that Councillor Daniels made about best practice in schools bucking the trend is a good one. I'm pleased to hear about Richard's plans to visit other schools, and maybe a stop in Caerphilly along the way would be very welcome. Rose's point about capacity and Stuart's point about governance is very, very valid as well, and I am just drawn to that. Our expectation of governance is very different from what it was 20 or 30 years ago, and do we need a reassessment of where we are in that respect? I think someone in my position must recognise that challenge is valid and appropriate on this, especially if done in a constructive way, and I recognise that. I recognise there's work to do to improve outcomes, and I recognise the need for us to focus on the support and challenge we're giving schools, and challenge to me and to us is entirely appropriate on that. I don't want a comfortable ride on this. I share your impatience. I think we all need to share that impatience to get results. It is valid, though, for us to point out the success stories where they exist in education, particularly in our primary schools, and how we can look to turn that into best practice that other schools can feed off. Sometimes I think there's an unwillingness for primaries and secondaries to learn for each other, but at the end of the day they're both schools and they can both learn in many respects from each other, and I think it's important to recognise that. I think that's also important because we need to recognise that staff in all our schools work hard and are dedicated to educating our young people. Denigrating their work, labelling them, or using schools as political footballs only makes things harder for those at the coalface, and I think we should try and avoid that. In reality, we all have a contribution to make. Governors, the community, councillors, pupils and parents, and I would like to pay tribute to the hard work of staff in schools. There are staff in all of our schools that go above and beyond the call of duty, and they really are heroes for the young people who they teach, and I would hate to hear any other message than that come out today, and to be fair, I don't think it has. We must strive for real, lasting improvements too, and not just cosmetic fixes. I would much rather affect real change than play the system to make things look better from the outside, even if that former route takes longer and involves tough discussions. I think with any colour-coding system, there's a temptation to try and trick the system to get yourself up the traffic light. Well, that's not really going to get us anywhere, especially if that means that the schools will get less support. I would much rather take longer to affect, real lasting improvements than to play that sort of game. So you've got my word that I'll work with Richard to roll up our sleeves and do our best by every school and every young person, and that any member who wants to get involved in that is more than welcome to play a part in scrutiny on governing bodies or on the advisory group. I'll work with Richard to report regularly back to you as members in council meetings, seminars and messages, and I look forward to this being a continued matter of debate for this council. So thank you for everyone who's contributed today, but thank you especially to Richard for taking what's not an easy role and taking that on with I've got great confidence that his approach will bear fruit.
Okay, we're looking at the recommendation that is to note, so Councillor needs to move and second that. Brilliant. Are we all happy to note that report? Fabulous. Anybody against? Any abstentions? No. Okay then, so item 5 is the date and time of the next meeting. So we've got another extraordinary meeting next week on the 10th of March. And we declare the meeting closed.